Hey, my name is Mark Romanek, and you're watching Fishing 411. On this week's episode, I got Ben Nielsen from Show Span Incorporated fishing with me. We're up at Lake Mitchell in Cadillac area. Guess what we're going after today? Whoa! First hookup of the morning. A jumper. Let's see if, oh, he wants to get down in those weeds. Ben, I don't think this one would be any too impressive by your standards.
Well,
but,
you know what? It's a start, I think, right? Is definitely, every fish is a good fish.
Every fish is a good fish. Well, what was good about him, if I can get untangled here, what was good about him is he bit like he was supposed to, and he came in the boat, but just a little largemouth. Definitely not what we have in mind today. Back you go, young man. You know, lucky for me, one of my friends is Ben Nielsen. Ben Nielsen works for Show Span Incorporated. That's the sports shows that put on all of the big boat and outdoor shows in Michigan. And Ben's quite the bass fisherman. He's had many tournaments up here on Lake Cadillac and Lake Mitchell, and he volunteered to take us out fishing, and I'm glad we took him up on that.
The deal is that normally in the morning, you know, these fish are a little bit more scattered. So, you know, you can kind of cast for them, they'll be out in between weed clumps and stuff. And as the day goes on and the sun gets brighter, then they'll bury up in those weeds, and then we'll get out the heavier gear and go in there and get them. So that's the plan anyway, and I see we got good weeds right here already, so that's good. Oh, just got smoked and missed it. Okay, well, he didn't miss it. That's what we call one of the toothy critters. So we missed that one for sure. One of probably many today, but there are definitely a lot of northerns in here.
Well, this week's episode is set in a place called Lake Mitchell. It's near Cadillac, Michigan, and ironically, it's about 5 minutes from my home here in northern Michigan. The ironic part about it is I get very little opportunity to fish here in Lake Mitchell, even though I've lived here most of my adult life.
The rig we're using right now is just a standard Texas rigged rubber worm. They've been around forever. You know, we do have a 1/4 ounce tungsten weight on the top, and then a straight shank hook on the bottom. You know, a couple things about that do separate it. And obviously the tungsten is great because we're able to feel what's down there a lot better than you normally would with any of your standard lead weights. Also notice that we aren't pegging it or doing anything to it. We're letting it just slide up and down the line. So when this bait's coming through weeds, a lot of times, you know, the sinker will kind of sink down, and then this bait will kind of just float up behind it. So it's a real natural presentation for those fish. And then on top of it, the other thing is a straight shank hook. You know, a lot of guys will use an offset shank or an extra wide gap hook, And the reason I like to go with a straight shank, you can see number one, it does hold the bait on there just fine. It doesn't slide down a lot or anything like that. And you know, that hook, you know, if you look at the point of that hook compared to where the tip is in relation to the line tie, there's a big gap right there to be able to drive into that fish's mouth. And with a lot of the offset hooks, your line tie is much more in line with that hook. And so it's much harder to get a hook into a fish, and a straight shank hook will hook a lot more fish when you're worm fishing. So just a little tip, but definitely worth paying attention to. So, and then when I slide that in there, you know, obviously I just bunch that up a little bit and then slide it in. I always kind of poke the hook point through just a little bit, and then I'll slide it back in just so you can barely feel that tip in there. And then you know that that bait's ready to go. So
I got the small bass thing going on here.
all right, all right.
All right.
Not a big one, but oh, look at here, Mark.
What are we dealing with here?
One of the things we were talking about the other day, the toothy critters, right?
So,
This one I was able to still get a hook into, though. Maybe if I can get a hold of them here. There we go. Look at that. If you're gonna hook a pike with fluorocarbon, that's where you want to hook them, I guess, right? Right on the very end so that he can't get a hold of your line. But nice guy. Certainly there are much bigger in here, but he's fun. Always fun to catch them.
Special considerations provided by Eagle Claw, proudly made in America since 1925. Additional considerations provided by Fishhawk Electronics. Trolling without a fishhawk is called boating.
the Cadillac area actually has two great fishing lakes here. Lake Mitchell is where we fish, and that's actually on the west side of 115 highway. On the east side of the highway is Lake Cadillac. Both lakes are great bass fishing, but I think the majority of people tend to spend their time on Lake Mitchell. And Ben, of course, really likes Lake Mitchell. It has more weeds, has more structure. It's a shallower, a little bit more complex lake to fish, but it's where the majority of the largemouth live. Well, Ben, I got some questions for you. You know, I've lived up here in northern Michigan most of my adult life and fished Mitchell an awful lot. And historically, this was a smallmouth fishery and a pretty good walleye fishery, lots of pike. But I don't associate this fishery as being a green bass fishery, and I know that's definitely not the case now. That's kind of made some switches, and I'm kind of curious what's created all this.
You know, obviously, I don't think it's one certain thing. A combination of factors, I think, are why this lake is so good for largemouth right now. But, you know, obviously, there's a lot more weeds in here than we've ever had before. You know, we have had, you know, some of the invasive weeds have kind of, you know, come into this lake, which isn't always a good thing, but what it has done is it's created some prime largemouth habitat out here that, you know, we didn't have in the past. And so, you know, part of it is a habitat thing, you know, where these fish really have, you know, all kinds of room to grow and multiply out here. And although there's still, you know, there are a lot of smallmouth in here, they have declined a little bit. I think some of that is habitat, some of that may have been fishing pressure, but overall, I just think the amount of forage that's in this lake combined with the habitat and the increased weed growth, you know, we just have more largemouth than we've ever had before out here.
Well, it's not a bad thing, and it's just I find it interesting how it's changed over the years. And I don't mind catching green bass.
No.
I just am kind of curious why we don't catch some maybe brown bass anymore.
I know, you know, I think it's, you know, the lake's just kind of changed a little bit, and I certainly can remember in some of my earlier years when I would come up here for tournaments, you know, people would actually, oh my gosh, he's got a largemouth. You know, I mean, it was all smallmouth, you know, and, you know, now, you know, we see smallmouths at tournaments up here, and as the fall goes on, we'll see more and more of those smallmouths, but in the middle of the summer, you probably only see, you know, out of a few hundred fish, 5 or 6 smallmouths get weighed in. You know, it's just taken a complete flop, you know, when it comes to that. But man, it has created some awesome largemouth.
Well, kudos for you for figuring it out and getting on a great bite. This is shaping up to be a pretty great day of fishing right now.
All right, so this is what you can call it a drop shot on steroids, a drop beaver, power shot. Doesn't really have a name yet, but it's rigged on really heavy gear. We had some 65-pound braided line on here, a 5/0 really heavy trocar flipping hook, and then just had these weights made for it. This is a 3/4 ounce weight, which basically gets that down into the weeds for us. So the gist of it is, you know, we're throwing this out just short distances, into the heavy weeds, it plummets to the bottom very fast. We're looking for a reaction bite. So a lot of times, as soon as it hits the bottom, they'll grab it. If there's nothing there, I hop it a couple times, and then I just pull it back out and make the next cast. The reason that this rig kind of came up was, in essence, we were fishing a lot of standard Texas rigged baits in here that were, 1 ounce, 1.5 ounce tungsten weights, which is a real popular way to do it. And we weren't landing that many of our fish. That big weight was getting in the way of getting a hook into the fish. So what we came up with here is basically running a drop shot. Now, obviously, when a fish grabs this down in the weeds, the only thing he's got is the hook. Now, sometimes this dragging does affect it a little bit, but obviously when he just has this bait and we go to set the hook, we get a much higher percentage of the fish that get hooked right and come in the boat. So that's why we came up with it. And on lakes that have a lot of weeds in it, it's a deadly way to catch them. There's no doubt about that. Got us on spot lock, Mark. See right there? Throw in there. If that's the clump, it'll be loaded with them. There we go. Nice fish. Another one on the power shot. Just super healthy looking fish in here. I mean, just beautiful fish. No marks on them, fat. Someday that thing's gonna weigh about 5 pounds. Not today, but.
Not today.
It's a beautiful fish. Here we go. Go back, grow up a little bit, and we'll catch you again.
Special considerations provided by Bait Rigs Tackle, America's innovator of fine fishing products. Additional considerations provided by the Ultimate Sports Show Tour, Michigan's premier sports shows.
At Precision Trolling Data, we've been in business since 1990. And you don't survive that long in the fishing industry without paying attention to details and doing things right. And we're very cautious when we do our testing to watch the variables of trolling closely. Things like line diameter, trolling speed, lead length, all those things we're paying very, very close attention to. But there's another detail we don't talk a lot about that's an important detail. If you look around me today, you're going to notice that it's glass calm out here today. And these are the conditions we do our testing in. The reason why we want calm conditions is that we're doing this in open water with a floating buoy. We can keep that buoy perfectly flat. So in other words, we can actually measure our data right down to the inch. If the buoy was doing this because of wave action, that'd make it a lot tougher. But how does that relate to you as a fisherman? You're fishing in the real world, and in the real world, there's going to be waves out there. Well, one of the things that we documented because of paying close attention to details is that on calm water, you get a certain depth off a crankbait. On rougher water, you tend to get a shallower depth off those same crankbaits with the same lead lengths. And the reason for this is friction. Have you ever had a situation where you've been trolling downwind and you caught fish and you turned around and went right back through the school on the same lead lengths going upwind and you couldn't get them to go, you couldn't get them to bite going upwind? The reason for that is going upwind or against the grain creates more friction and your lures are running anywhere from 1.5 to 2 feet shallower for the same lead length. That's an interesting fact. And it's something that we'd have never known if we weren't paying attention to details at Precision Trolling Data. Well, Ben, one of the things I want to pick your brain about, if a guy wanted to get involved in doing a little bass fishing, but he didn't want to invest a ton of money, what would be your recommendations as far as a modest setup? Say maybe 3 rod and reel combos. What would you recommend a bass fisherman invest in?
If a guy wanted to have 3 setups, I would recommend probably 2 casting rod and reel setups and 1 spinning rod setup. Certainly, he's going to want to have something that's a little bit more stout, something in that 7.5 foot medium heavy range, something that's set up with like a 50-pound braid. That would enable them to do all, their flipping and pitching. Could throw a worm on it, Carolina rig, really good all-purpose rod. And then with that, another rod that's probably like a 7 foot, medium heavy, but something that's got a little bit more of a parabolic bend. That would let them throw, topwater baits, crank baits, all of those treble hook lures that you want a little bit softer action for, just so that, obviously the fish don't get off as much. And then 1 spinning rod setup, either with like a, 8 to 10 pound fluorocarbon on it. That's a setup that you could throw a tube jig on. You could throw, darter is another thing I throw. You could throw a drop shot on that. Kind of an all-purpose, spinning rod setup. And really, that's all you would need to really kind of cover all the bases. Now, certainly, you know, I've probably got more rods than most women have shoes, but, you know, that all comes with fishing, and it's really, at that point, just fun for me, you know, to have all that stuff. But those 3 setups, you can go pretty far and be able to cover all your bases here in Michigan. See you, buddy.
This guy's staying down pretty good.
That's what we like.
Making me a little nervous because I didn't get much of a swing on him. That's
Great.
decent fish.
Nice fish.
Decent fish. All right, see if I can give him a little swing in here. I'm too old to bend over. Ben can bend over and pick up them bass. I gotta swing them in here. Not bad. All right, little guy. I'll see you again. So definitely a little bit of life along this edge.
Yes, there is.
Well, Ben, I got to ask you. You know, weed patterns like this tend to be seasonal, and right now it's at the end of August, so it's late in the summertime, and they're going pretty good here today for us. But I'm curious how long this pattern is going to last. You know, when will this die, or how do you know when to kind of forget about this pattern and move on to the next pattern?
You know, really, like you said, end of August right now, weather's going to kind of dictate things. You know, obviously we're here in Michigan, and we have yet to see what September holds for us, but generally speaking, this pattern will hold till about the end of September. You know, the fish will still be staged up in that heavier grass, you know, holding in there and feeding on crayfish and bluegill. But if we have a cold September and things really cool off, then they're going to get more onto the bait and start roaming around a lot more. And that's when, you know, your jerk baits will start catching them again, your crankbaits, you know, that stuff will really kick in, you know, come end of September and then October. And really this lake can be pretty tough on largemouths in October, but there we go. That's when we start to shine on
I can catch up to this boy.
As we're saying it, right? Mark's hooked up. That's fantastic.
He's off.
Oh, he's got the weed bass. In October, the smallmouth come back. You know, like I was saying earlier, the smallmouth have gotten a little bit better in this fishery, and in October, most of the tournaments here are dominated by smallmouths again. So just kind of weird how that all works out.
Big hook set, small bass. It's funny because you can't, when you get the bite, they all feel good. You can't tell whether it's a big fish or not. I feel bad for that guy. Just about tore him right out of the water on the hook set. Back he goes.
Special considerations provided by Trailmaster Trailers, quality custom boat trailers. Additional considerations provided by Procure, ruthlessly effective bait suds.
Now, not a big one. But it is, first fish in a little while, different fishing rod. I just set down the traditional bait caster and picked up a spinning rod with a drop shot. And what was that, second cast, I think? Something like that. Caught one. So hopefully that'll be a sign of things to come here. We'll see.
We've been going through quite a bit of plastic. In fact, quite frankly, we've been going through a lot of plastic. And one of the things I want to remind people is that these soft plastic lures, you don't want to throw them in the water when you're done with them. Fish tear these things up and they have to be replaced periodically, but don't throw them in the water. Just throw them in a pile in your boat. At the end of the day, discard them. Because what will happen is that fish will eat these darn things and they don't digest, and it just falls up in the fish's stomach and eventually can kill the fish. So definitely take the extra effort to clear up your plastic and take it with you and throw it away where it belongs, in the trash can.
Mark, I'm thinking the drop shot might be the ticket here right now.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's a couple quick bites right there.
Yeah. When all else fails, right? All out the old drop shot, and not a huge fish, but once again, I mean, the fish here just, I mean, they're beautiful looking fish. Just as healthy as can be.
Whoa, this is a little bit better fish.
That's a nice one.
I may have to break my rule, Ben, about bending over.
You know, Mark, I could help you if you want.
I am getting a little old and decrepit, but maybe I can handle this. Let's see.
All right.
He might be, I could still kind of alley-oop this guy. We'll give him the Roland Martin treatment here. There we go, that's a much better fish. Much better fish. And he ate it. Oh my goodness, did he eat it. I'm gonna need my pliers on this rascal. No question that he liked your little rig. There you go, little guy. Away he goes. Well, I met Ben many years ago at the sport shows. Actually, he's the guy that hires me to do seminars at the sport shows. But we have a lot in common. Obviously, we enjoy fishing and hunting. And the cool thing about sport shows is it brings all this under one roof. So when you go to a big sport show, wherever it might happen to be in your hometown or maybe another town someplace else, the beauty of it is what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of your neighbors show up there, all because we enjoy the same thing, the great outdoors.
Nice dark back on him. Big gut. We'll let him go here so we can catch him again. There you go, buddy. The bite here, you know, we were just talking, you know, if I was in a tournament right now and fishing, having caught what we've caught so far today, I'd be very happy with it. Just because I know that in this lake, the bite gets better and better as the day goes on. And they're just kind of roaming everywhere. But what happens is as the sun gets out and the day wears on, these fish will really settle down and they'll get into those weeds. And once they start getting into those weeds, they start grouping up and getting more predictable on where they're going to be, and then usually we catch a lot more. So it's definitely an afternoon and evening lake. It fishes even better. A little bit better fish. Come here, fishing line. Boy, look how nice he's being right now. You see that? I mean, like, he knows.
He knows you're going to let him go,
Yeah,
huh?
he knows. He's like, all right. I mean, that is just a healthy fish. Look how pretty that fish is. Perfect looking fish. All right. Oh, now he's going to decide to fight a little bit here. There you go, buddy.
Hey, my name is Mark Romanek, and you've been watching Fishing 401. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Ben Nielsen for showing us a great time out here on Lake Mitchell bass fishing. Man, we touched a lot of fish today.
We did, yeah. We had a great day as far as numbers, you know. The size was a little off. Love to have caught that giant, but that's fishing, right?
Well,
you know?
It is fishing, and I'm going to take home something special, or power shotting.
Power shotting, yes, that's right.
So,
absolutely.
It's something pretty cool. So, hey, again, I appreciate everyone tuning in. See you same time, same place next week.
Closed captioning is provided by Fishhawk Electronics. Fishing 411 is brought to you by Offshore Tackle, Yakima Bait, Starcraft Marine, Jay's Sporting Goods, Cisco Fishing Systems, Smooth Moves, Precision Trolling Data, Niagara Falls, USA, Motor Guide Electric Motors, and Lowrance Electronics.
Sissy rod, as you refer to
Sissy
it.
rod, yeah.
The sissy rod. Probably we just alienated half of America by calling spinning tackle sissy tackle.
Yeah, I know.
I know I'm going to get letters. I know it.